everything on track and to make sure that what we procure meets the full needs of the service. So I'm proposing that we use £300,000 of the underspend towards that. Pick everything up. So the underspend position overall, we've had clearly the underspend on the whole time pay, but if I can just draw your attention to section 2.15, where we've got expected surplus on total income of nearly £500,000 from when we set the budget. Some of that is relating, a significant amount of that 180,000 is the apprenticeship levy that is quite difficult to determine when we set the budget process. A lot of the costs that relate to that are already built into the budget because we use them from the training budget that we've already got. So any surplus money that we get in from that is usually results in a surplus for the budget. And we've also had 164,000 extra interest receivable due to the increase in interest rates that we're getting now, because we're now achieving rates of around 3%, to be between 3 and 3.5%, whereas at the beginning of the financial year, and when we set the budget, we were expecting more like 0.5%. So it's quite a significant increase. And we do borrow some of the money. We've borrowed a significant amount of money at the early part of the year to try and take advantage of the lower interest rates with our borrowing. So they're now invested until the capital expenditure comes through, which is hence the result in the increased interest income. So moving on to reserves on section 2.18, you'll see a table of reserves. The general fund balance is slightly healthier than I was expecting when we set the budget. So that underspend figure will feed through into the general fund reserve, which places in a good position for next financial year as we face challenges further when we set the budget for 24-25. The capital programme, there's quite a significant number of capital related recommendations on the report, which I'll run through with you at the end. Generally, they're quite small amounts just to tidy up the capital budget as we approach year end and to reflect the minor adjustments to projects. We've suffered some delays because of certainly in the vehicles, as you know, because of difficulty to obtain parts and the difficulty to obtain the lengthened supply chains. And also costs have increased and changed quite significantly throughout the year in some of the capital projects. So we've got more movement than we would normally have. So if I take you just talk you through the recommendations on page 24, there's a table at the top of page 24, table 5, is a small amount of slippage that's requested into next financial year, 285,000 just for some projects that we know will not be completed by the end of this month today. And also table 6 shows we've got some underspends that we've achieved through the year, and we'd like to reallocate those to workshop station, which we've got a slight increase in costs at the end of the year and some retention payments that are due for next year, which are over budget. So we'd like to reallocate it to those. I would say it's £117,000, but on the scale of the whole cost of the budget it's a very small percentage increase. And also we're looking at a new project to extend the life of some of the breathing apparatus, to change some valves that we're looking at would extend the life of those breathing apparatus by about 10 years. So it's an investor save project. So we'd like to utilise some of the underspend to put towards that project. I would say the underspend, the replacement duty rig and the light vehicles, we've got an over provision in those two projects because the budget is included in next year, which is why we don't need it in this year due to the delays. That we've had a review of those two projects, so we've almost got the project budget in twice, which is why we can take those out. So is anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask?
Thank you. I was just going to wanted to understand a little bit more the underspend on overtime, because usually if you're holding vacancies and things, your overtime would potentially go up, wouldn't it? So why is both basic pay costs and overtime going down? How did we achieve that?
You'll see the overtime budget has not, we haven't underspent on the original budget. So we have, the actual overtime budget from the original budget has overspent by 52,000, but we'd increased the budget in the year to try
even more.
To try and, because we knew that we were under-resourced in that area. So, and also after the fires in the summer, we clearly had a lot of additional requirements and on our resources, and we increased the overtime pressure on that. And the same with the on-call was very high during that period, and we reflected that forward to think that we would need quite a significant extra bit of money in the overtime budget, and that's where we've managed to contain it, and the on-call budget has seen about a 25% reduction in on-call turnouts from Q4 to Q1, so it shows an indication of activity levels is a bit lower, which has enabled us to reduce that overtime spend.
Lovely. So we just overestimated how much
we needed to increase it.
Yeah, lovely. That makes much more sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger. Thank you. I haven't been on the fire authority that long, so forgive me if I'm asking a question that is fairly naive, but a little bit of clarity, if I may, on page 19, item 242, property capital programme. It's under the estates section, and it talks there of a review of future property capital projects is underway, and then at the end of that paragraph, the capital programme for future years has been approved. Now it's probably not the time and the place, but I don't understand what the future years, how long that is. I mean, it's just an open end to me. Is it 1, 2, 5, 10 years? And is the review of the future property capital programme, what is future? Are we talking 1 year or 5?
I can explain that. In the medium-term financial strategy, we have a 10-year capital plan. 10 years. That's looked at in December, and it's indicative. It's not. It's obviously wise for us to plan that far ahead, because we need to ensure that we can afford the borrowing costs, and it helps us forward project what we're likely to need. As part of the budget report in February, that includes 4 years worth of capital programme, but you only approve the capital programme for the next following year, for 23-24, to start. Yeah. So those programs, because the funding might change and we might need to review it. So when we were looking at the capital programme, the overall 10-year capital programme was looking prohibitive when we put everything in that we wanted to do. We've prioritised equipment and vehicles because they're operationally needed, and a lot of our vehicles have become quite old because of the delays we'd had in managing to replace them through COVID, and that left that just left the estates programme that we had some flexibility over. So we put a temporary pause on that, largely because we didn't know where we're going with the funding, and we're in a bit of a better position now. We've had the funding settlement, and we've got some indication for next year regarding increases in revenue support grant. So when we bring the programme next year, we will anticipating that we can probably better build in, take that delay out and be a bit more accurate in what we're presenting when we do the budget process. starting in December this year.
Thank you. That's very helpful on the timeframes. I personally think that's quite a comprehensive review at the moment then, because it's talking about emphasis on accessibility, inclusion, sort of DDA access to the various assets you've got on property and fire stations, and then it adds on all about the Ollerton Centre, and then all about decarbonisation of the whole of the estate. I mean, to me, that's quite a big project. I mean, it is a project, is it? All put together with a project brief, and it's underway to be finished sometime soon.
And that's partly why we delayed the training school capital bid, so that we could do that work before we started it. We need to do a training needs assessment for the organisation, and how we can meet that in a financially sustainable way. And once we've got that together, then we'll know what capital needs we need to build, or whether we can deliver it through there may be different ways we can deliver it through having one
Sure.
training school in the whole county.
It just seems a big, quite detailed brief to me as one project. And I suppose my fear is that you do this and you come up with some recommendations. The danger is, that the risk is that you may spend money on certain fire stations or assets that 5 or 6 years down the track you might do another review and say, well, wish we hadn't spent that money at that fire station, we're now going to close it, or it needs replacing. It's just the project brief, and you're absolutely sure you're doing the right thing in this project. That's all my comment was.
Chief? Yeah, I mean, Becky, in terms of the details, absolutely right. We've paused the major capital programme, but also I'd refer you back to your own community risk management plan that talks about trying to be outstanding by 2032. And in there, as part of the 6 strategic priorities, is environmental. So this isn't a kind of a 1 year or single CRMP issue. We recognise as well that the city, in terms of carbon neutral 2028 and those kinds of things. So we're part of that, and we're also bidding for funding as part of the city bid. Because of course we've got stations within the city boundaries where we are getting access to some of the funding. So things like EV charge points across our sites where even maybe city employees of the council can use. So we know it's a long-term thing. We clearly, council, have to be very proportionate about what we can do over what period of time. I can assure you in terms of like our annual delivery plans, so the things that we work to internally and the department heads work to, you know, it's a long process and sometimes a painful process to decide what are the strategic priorities to make sure we deliver your CRMP. So hopefully we can give you some assurance around that, and if you wish to have any more conversation with it, I think any of the officers or myself can certainly talk in detail about that with you.
That's fine, thank you very much. Good.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, so that's on page 9, it's also on the back of the papers. The only thing I'd say is it used to be healthier than what we were a few months back.
Yes.
And I think that's coming across all the authorities that I sit on at the moment. It looks as though in effect we've got an unplanned 2-year sort of gap. Yeah. But whoever picks up government or whoever picks up whatever at the end of that, we've still got to push for that 3-year plan. Yeah, which will help. I know it's difficult, but it will help if we've got the 3-year plan.
I certainly know from the conversation Becky and I had, it would help if we had a longer term view.
Yeah.
And I think really with the flexibility in council tax preset for local council tax to be increased, and the levels of business rates that have come into the county, they have been the 2 single things that I think that we've really seen have put us in a healthier position than we may well have been.
And we don't want too many fires like the Mansfield one last week, which would take a bit of funding, wouldn't it, to do that?
Yes, I mean, I suppose really it's covered within costs, and if you look at the on-call that would have been in there, we had a 25% reduction. So I suppose over the year, these instances, we don't like to say balancing out, but over the year between summer and other periods, it kind of projects and balances itself out in the main.
Okay, thank you. So move those recommendations are on page 9. We're seconded. Yeah, thank you. We agreed. We agreed. Moving on to item 5, which is on page 29, internal audit report.
Thank you, Chair. So we used to bring all the internal audit reports in one batch at the end of the year, but it was quite a big report that was difficult to digest, really. So we tried to bring them when we have enough to bring and do it in 2 lots, and that's what we're doing with this report. we're giving you all those reports that have been completed up until about the end of February. And so you can have a look at those, and then we'll bring a full annual report from your internal auditors, which is provided by Nottingham County Council when we have the meeting probably in June. So we've had four internal audit reports that have been completed. The other four are all in progress, apart from the corporate governance report, which has been delayed until next year because we're having some difficulties in resourcing it at the moment. So the other three you will receive they're very close to being completed, so you will receive those at the next meeting. So we've had the four reports that we've had. The performance management one, they're all showing reasonable, well, the first three are showing reasonable assurance, which is acceptable. And the performance management audit is an area where we have struggled to get something in place for some years, and trying to get accurate information to inform the CRMP and monitor our performance has provided some level of difficulty. And we've now got the resourcing in the team correct. We've employed a new business intelligence manager in the team, and that's really helped us progress things, and we've made a significant amount of progress. So there are, I think there's 9 recommendations in that report, so there are a lot of recommendations, and I know that seems a lot, but from where we were, I think we would not have received this reasonable assurance if this audit had been undertaken 1 or 2 years ago. So we're going to use those recommendations to carry on our improvement in this area, and personally I'm quite pleased that we received the reasonable assurance, and I think it's an area that we're getting better at, and we need to, because the performance data does feed all the HMI inspections, and also provides us information for our own CRMP and monitoring our own performance. So, moving on to the fleet maintenance audit. This audit again provided reasonable assurance. However, there are 2 priority 1 recommendations relating to the monitoring of vehicle maintenance, and I know we've had over the last certainly 3 years, we've always struggled to maintain the fleet maintenance budget within the budget levels that we've set at the beginning of the year. So one of those recommendations was about having better performance monitoring meetings to enable us to identify what we actually need with relation to maintenance, and to set a realistic budget. So I think that's a fair criticism, and it's something that we're already started working on, trying to improve. And the other one was about monitoring the performance levels within the contract. And again, that's something that we're now looking at, trying to improve the availability of assets, because that's a particular area that the auditors have picked up that we need to make improvement on. So despite the reasonable assurance, there are 2 key areas that we're taking on board and looking at as a matter of urgency to get resolved. So asset disposal audit. This audit was undertaken last year, and we received a limited assurance, which is the lowest level that we can get. And for that reason, we've done a lot of work on improving our asset disposal methods and ensuring that it happens properly. And the auditors have been in to do a secondary audit to monitor our progress against it. So of the recommendations that have, 4 of the recommendations were cleared from the original report, and of the remaining 2, 1 of those has now been completed, and the other one is very close to being addressed too. So it's good to see that asset disposal audit has now sort of turned around. The final one is the budget management audit. And that's been awarded substantial assurance that risk levels are low. Obviously, quite very pleased about that. But it's an area that we do day in, day out, and it's what we would expect. I would be very disappointed if we didn't get anything, if we didn't have that kind of level about something that we do all the time. So all the audit reports are reviewed by the strategic leadership team, and all the recommendations within the reports are monitored and reported back through the strategic leadership team, and the high priority ones will be reviewed by the internal auditors when they come in and they do their annual review. So you will see further update on those priority one areas. And then the ones are reviewed internally. So if anybody's got any questions on those,
Mike.
Yeah, I chair another organisation, and I really need assurance that we are fully monitoring our asset register and that it is up to date, because the particular issue about ICT is an issue that I've come across in at least 2 organisations, particularly with working from home, where laptops and so on have disappeared, and they hold sensitive data, which could leave us open to a data breach. And I just want an assurance that we are on it, and that we know where every bit of ICT equipment is in the organisation, whether it be taken home, whether it be on site, whether it be, because the concern is that we've actually bought new equipment, but there's no record of disposal of the old equipment. And that, to me, is a serious risk to the organisation.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the individual report and assurances, I think the move from headquarters gave us an opportunity, things like we had a bit of a clear out, because there certainly was a number of equipment in terms that hadn't been disposed of properly, and I had a conversation some weeks ago about, that's now improved. I think it is still a work in progress. I think agile working, your point is absolutely right. I'd also link it as well, not just to kind of the asset disposal, but also the cyber security one that's already there as well. So, and that also links into employment policy that we have in the organisation. So induction and then exit, whether that's, a notified exit or a speedy exit, what process have we got in place really to disable those devices where there may be a risk to the organisation. So some of it is a head scratching thing on the face of it. It seems like, how do you issue and return and dispose of a piece of kit? And it's somewhat more complicated than that, but we'll take your comments back.
Yeah. I mean, when we finished doing our asset re-evaluation, we actually found that 9 pieces of equipment were missing, and it is a serious issue.
Well, all the IT assets are included on a register, and they do have a asset number, and they are the audit, the stock audit, and the maintenance of the asset registers is picked up by our external auditors as well. So I take some assurance from that. I can't say, things are never perfect, but I know in lockdown I had a couple of problems with my computer, and I got a spare one. I got a new one and kept the old one as a spare, and they did chase me up and they knew I'd got it and threatened to lock it so that nobody. So they did chase me up when they hadn't got it back. So I'll say from what I have seen, they do certainly have good controls over the IT equipment. I can't say they're perfect in every way. Clearly, we've got the asset disposals audit before you, and we wouldn't have had that if we didn't think we've got any issues at all. But I think overall, from what I've seen, they do have procedures in place.
Okay, Mark. Nobody else? Okay, recommendations on page 29. Move those. Seconded. You agree? You agree. Thank you. Moving over to final item, which is Matt on corporate risk management, and that's on page 63.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members.
Morning.
Members will be aware of this report because it's one that comes through previously on a 6-monthly frequency that has been escalated to a 3-month frequency. So you'll be well versed with this report. Just talking about the 6-month, 3-month frequency, you will remember back in when this report was presented in October that the service was facing quite high levels of risk, which we deem very high, our highest level of risk in a number of areas. As a result of that, the Chair asked that we sort of share the awareness of this at full authority, and a report went to full authority in December, just so all members, across all committees had oversight of the risk that was faced in authority at the time. At the request of full authority, it was decided that we would bring this report through to a 3-monthly frequency, just so we could keep an eye on the levels of risk that was being faced. I do have to say that since that, we are facing a little bit of a different picture, which is positive. As you will be aware, much of the risk that is in this report is external factors that face you as an authority. One of the key risks we were facing in the approach to Christmas, and indeed the early part of this year, was the risk of industrial action, and how we were sort of reviewing industrial action was that it actually linked into a number of risk areas of the authority. And we had 6 areas very high when it was last reported. You are no doubt aware that the decision has been taken by the Fire Brigades Union membership to accept a national pay officer, and as such the risk of industrial action has resided. And that means that 3 core areas of risk, namely mobilising, employee engagement and the availability of resources, have all been able to be reduced. If you look at the table which is presented on 2.4, we have tried to simplify how we report risk to you. We've actually put a hierarchical table on there just so you can see the various risk areas and how they present. Obviously the full detail for you to scrutinise is presented in the corporate risk register, which is in Appendix A, and that gives you obviously why we think the risk is, what control measures we've got in place to try and mitigate that. And the risk rating you see is obviously the residual risk rating, so that's after all the control measures we put in place, we still think there's that level of risk facing the authority. And again, to try and simplify reporting, we've tried to focus more on exception reporting, so reported to this committee will be those areas deemed very high, just to allow for that oversight and scrutiny. As you can see from the table, we've got 3 areas deemed very high currently facing the authority, and I'll give a quick overview of what they are. The first one is the inability to set a balanced budget, which is the title that we give it, and this authority, probably more than most, will be aware of the financial situation through its monitoring. And the key bit with that is, although we find ourselves in a more positive position, we do have to use £0.4 million worth of reserves to set a balanced budget next year, and then the longer term forecast just show a significantly more deficit of 1.1 million and then 1.8 million in future years. So we need to keep an eye on that. And those figures are being built into our corporate planning process and our annual business plan for next year and indeed future years. The next risk is the firefighters' pension scheme, and since the last report we have received some legislation relating to that, but there is still some uncertainty. That's on the McLeod area of that. There has been no update on the sort of Matthews and O'Brien's case. We are waiting for that. One of the risks to the authority is both waiting the outcomes of that, but also having the expertise, if you like, to be able to implement any recommendations. And this is a sort of national, this is a skill set that's in national shortage at the moment. We are trying to look at how we recruit to a vacant pensions officer's post at the moment. The next risk is very high, which is mobilising. One of the major risks that was facing the authority last time was the risk of industrial action and effectively a loss of our formal control function and the need to introduce an intermediary system that, as I've reported, has now gone. But the main risk in this area now is based on our current and future mobilising systems. So the situation we currently have with our current supplier and the work that's ongoing with those, the work to try and find a new replacement mobilising system, and that is a multi-million-pound, very complex project that we've got ongoing. But also, members will be aware that Leicester Fire and Rescue Services chose to remove themselves from the tri-service, and we need to look at the process to actually remove them from the current arrangements and then further build on our relationship with Derbyshire to form the new joint control system. So that's the risk currently reporting at very high. There is a new risk to advise you on. So this one is the risk of service reputation, which we're detailing as risk 15. You are no doubt aware that the fire service is in the spotlight, and not in the way where we would want it to be. It's largely in the spotlight based around cultural practices, and this has been prompted by a couple of notable national reports. The first was the London Fire Brigade Cultural Report that was released at the end of last year, and then the second was the Her Majesty's Inspectorate's State of Fire Report, which again commented on culture in the fire services. Anybody that was watching national news this morning or listening to local radio will also be aware that HMI released a report late last night, which has made the press this morning, and again, it doesn't paint a positive picture of the sector as a whole. So as a result of that, we've put a new risk on the register, which is service reputation. I would like to give members some assurance that the feedback that the sort of national coverage is around the national sector. We do have a CRMP ambition, which is specifically around this area, which is around EDI and inclusion, and we do continue to have that as a strategic priority. Locally, our last service inspection reported as good in the people pillar, which covers EDI and values and culture, so that is positive. But that said, we know we've got work to do in this area alongside the sector. We did have an independent review of EDI, as you'll be aware, last year, and we have an action plan in place to continue to improve in that area. And also, we're doing a gap analysis on both the LFB cultural report, but also the report that's come out this morning. We're actively looking at that to see if we can tease out any learning, and again, we're committed to making this organisation the best it can be for not just our employees, but also our communities as well. So that's a new area of risk. And then the proposal is that we will actually look to, or recommend to, that we actually de-escalate some areas of risk. The reason for that is so this committee can focus on the highest level of risk facing the authority. And what we've done is, around about this time each year, we do quite a deep dive of this risk register to make sure that it fits in with our annual business planning process, and risk actually drives our approach to business going forward. So we've done a really deep dive of every single area of risk. And what we are proposing is there is a threshold around about the medium level, or at the medium level. So any risk that we deem to be medium or above will come to this authority, and anything less than that will be managed at departmental level, led by an area manager at that level. To try and validate this approach, I have done, although it's not cited in the report, a sort of a national review as well. I always keep an eye on the risk register of other services just to make sure, I suppose, there's nothing that we've missed, or if there is something different, it's different because of local reasons. And this does bring us more into line with, I suppose, more of a national approach on this. So there is a recommendation that we look to remove certain areas of risk, and those are risk 11, legal knowledge, risk 12, programme governance, risk 13, environmental impact, and those three are all reported as low, and risk 9, which is the emergency services network, and you may be aware that this is a national project which has been paused for the next couple of years, so currently it's sat very stable, so that risk is currently zero for the authority at the moment. So I think I'll close the summary there, and quite happy to take any.
Thanks, Matt. Any comments, Mike?
Just confused why risk 9 is in twice.
Risk 9, where, oh, look it up. Oh, my apologies, that must be typo. So risk 9, let me just confirm with you through the risk register is.
And lots of us have seen it before getting here today.
Risk 9 is the availability of resources.
Yeah, but it's in twice. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And it's two different levels of risk as well.
Yeah. My apologies for that. I will check with that and make sure it's finalised for the summary.
Yeah.
There is
It should be, it's the bottom one, so it should be, it's 8 medium risk, so it needs to come
So
out, they're high
one at
risk
the
one.
top needs to come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, normally, in terms of risk registers, most corporate bodies concentrate on the top 10 corporate risks. So having 15 on it, which we had, I'm quite pleased that we're now reducing it probably down to 10. And you can always lump things together, like risk 1 and 2 are financial. You could risk that as financial pressure on the organisation, which is a risk. But it's semantics. But at the end of the day, reducing it down to 10 makes it more manageable from the point of view of this committee, looking at it and assessing and making sure that we're on top of it.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you, Mark. That if we can just get down to the very high and just focus on those 3 or 4 at this level, the risk levels we look at, I think the last few years around how we've matured around trying to integrate corporate risk management with the CRMP, with business planning. So we're in a very iterative process, but we'll certainly try and do that. I think the downside of some of these, certainly up to this point, lots of them have been very high. and we wanted to make sure we're being very explicit about pensions are an issue and not get it lost in the wider financial set in the budget.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's more than just financial risk in a way. I think we should be getting some grant to help mitigate some of the financial risk, but it is being able to deliver it and work alongside and the long-term impact on the staff of having the uncertainty is managing things like that as well.
We've got the same issue in education as well.
Yeah. If I could just make a point, Chair, because it's an opportunity to do so and it's fresh around the new area of risk, the reputation side. So if I think about some of the things like LFB and the criticism sector, what impact it having on our communities, it's questioning whether people feel safe to have firefighters in their homes. It's questioning whether people from underrepresented groups want to join the fire and rescue service and be part of that culture. And really my reassurance as your Chief Fire Officer is that we are absolutely not complacent about it. We are actively looking to see what more resources we can bring to bear to push that. And what I would say, my view, in terms of technology and culture are the two biggest areas of challenge to us in future years. But we clearly need to go much further, much faster around our culture. And we're going to need the momentum and support of all our stakeholders, represented bodies. And clearly, as you know, through your Strategic Inclusion Board as members, we know that we're going to be under the spotlight from you as well. So we need to make sure that we push it further and faster.
Are we aware of any issues within Nottinghamshire? Because the report that came out inferred that every
rodent.
Yeah, well,
was affected by that issue.
Well, there's a number of ways of finding that out. Is we carry out a staff survey where the percentage of staff feel whether they feel they've been bullied and harassed within the previous 2 years, because we usually do it over a 2-year period. The HMI themselves do an anonymous staff survey, and I think last time they reported something like 12% of people who responded to the survey said that they felt they'd been bullied and harassed in some way. Now, there's obviously a degree of that, but for me that's irrelevant. 12% of this organisation told an external body they felt bullied and harassed, and we need to deal with that very robustly. There's also the internal processes, employment processes, where one person raises a concern, and then that's looked at effectively or robustly in the organisation, and we keep data and records. So in your HR committee, for example, you'll talk about previous quarter about numbers of grievances registered, number of bullying harassments, number of dismissals. So we've got the metrics there. There is some work we need to do about HR analytics, so how do we fully understand the data in the organisation, and there is some tools that are available that we're working through on that as well. And of course, you know, we're under the spotlight all the time, but we certainly do need to be very transparent and deal with some of these issues. The Spotlight report does not mention, I think it only mentions 2 fire and rescue services in particular because of the causes for concern that they got through the inspection programme. And they get additional engage, which means actually they get additional scrutiny and monitoring from Her Majesty's Inspectorate. We got good, but HMI themselves have come under some scrutiny about they're giving fire and rescue services good in their people strand, and then we're finding cases of bullying and harassment. And it's not an excuse when I say this, is that our organisation reflects society and there is problems in society. But what I can control is some of the issues we have in this organisation and what it's like to be in this organisation. So hopefully we'll be bringing some more proposals, whether it be around budget environment, if that's required, to allocate further resources to this committee, whether it's HR committee or Strategic Inclusion Board or wider authority. We've got some plans already in place. We've gone to have to review following this report as well about are we coordinating enough, and is the message strong enough in the organisation at all levels? Because I can't do this on my own with the team. This has got to be at every level, owning the problem that is real. Because I said in the previous email to staff from the LFB report, we are not London Fire Brigade, for example. London Fire Brigade are putting massive amount of effort in, quite rightly, through the Commissioner, and we need to be not naive to think that some of those problems don't exist in our organisation.
Thank you, and there'll be a report coming back to the main committee at some point.
There will indeed, Chair, yes.
Yeah. It's just similar to that. I was saying to council yesterday about the police, the Met, you know, the sort of smears that have been put on the Met, and there will be some awful people in there, and the wrong sort of people went in there. But in majority of the people are good people doing a good job. The only thing I could see is the press are going to have a birthday, aren't they? And then you know, our blue light services are going to get more and more abuse.
Probably quite rightly so as well, Chair. In all honesty, if there's a problem, we've got to call it out.
Yeah,
if
call
there's
it
a
out and
problem,
sort it out.
We're
Yeah.
all subject to scrutiny as public
Yeah.
servants, and the public have a higher level of expectation of a blue light service.
Yeah.
Having had 3 decades of serving this organisation, I think I recognise that every single day of getting up and coming to work. If everybody did their bit, you know, I think we'd deal with 90% of this issue, but I don't think we'll eradicate every individual who feels like they can behave in a particular way. So there's a real cultural journey, as I said. We need to do something about going further and faster.
Yeah, I think it was pretty depressing driving the way here to hear on the radio the fire service in the news, not a particularly great thing. And I think, as you mentioned, it does pose a risk to the reputation. But of course, you know, we've got to make sure that, you know, that there are problems in the fire service, that they are actually addressed, and we need to have it to address it from the very top as well.
Yes.
From a leadership perspective, and we're pleased this will be going to the full authority as well as any of the subcommittees that deal with this. I think now that we've almost seen the report, it's time that we grasp at it both hands and really clamp down on anything that's happening in Nottinghamshire Fire Service. Just to make sure that, you know, we don't get a bad reputation. It's a place that we don't want to do, people, fire service don't want to work, but also for our residents who may actually turn to distrust the fire service, which is not something we want at all.
No, it's you know, my image of what a firefighter should be is kind of like so far away from, you know, a member of the public, regardless of who they are, worrying about what the service level they can receive from this fire and rescue service.
Well, that's where they do their own visits as well, looking at things like that. You know, do I want that person in?
Yeah,
And it'll make that nervousness, which is probably totally unnecessary. But
yeah, and we can use the kind of sort of thing about this does not reflect the vast majority of people who work in the fire and rescue service,
Yeah.
but it reflects enough of the fire and rescue service for it to be a problem.
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Back to page 63 and the recommendations. Any other comments on the risks? Patients? No. Okay, I'll move that recommendation there. And seconded. Thank you. Agreed. I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. And I think it's only Nicola, is it you that's finishing? Just
I'm finishing, yes.
thank you very much for your time with us and good luck for the future.
Thank you very much.
Hope everything goes all right. And the rest of us will see you next time round.